The tiny puppy lay trembling on the rocky shore, its fur matted with salt and dirt. The waves lapped gently nearby, but the ocean had not been kind to this little one. Its frail body was covered in scrapes from barnacles, and parasites clung stubbornly to its skin, feeding off its weakness. No one knew how it had ended up there, perhaps abandoned, perhaps lost. But fate had not yet given up on the helpless creature. A fisherman, returning from his early morning catch, spotted the small bundle of fur barely moving between the rocks. His heart clenched at the sight. Without hesitation, he set his fishing gear aside and waded carefully toward the injured pup. As he lifted it into his arms, he could feel its ribs protruding beneath its skin, its breath weak but steady. He rushed home, where his wife gasped at the sight of the wounded animal. They worked quickly, cleaning the pup's wounds, picking off the parasites one by one, and wrapping it in a warm towel. The puppy whimpered, but did not resist. It was as if it knew that, for the first time in a long while, it was safe. Days passed, and the little one slowly began to regain its strength. The fisherman and his wife fed it small portions of food, careful not to overwhelm its fragile body. They spoke to it in soothing tones, giving it the love and comfort it had never known. Then, one morning, something miraculous happened. The puppy, once too weak to lift its head, stood up on shaky legs. Its tail gave the slightest wag, and for the first time, its eyes held a glimmer of life. It wasn't just surviving anymore, it was fighting to live. Months later, no one would have recognized the once broken pup. Its fur had grown thick and healthy, its eyes bright with happiness. It ran along the beach beside the fisherman, barking with joy as the waves crashed nearby. The ocean had tried to take this little life, but love, kindness, and resilience had given it a second chance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the waves, the fisherman sat on the porch, watching the puppy, now a strong, playful dog, chase the tide. He smiled, knowing that saving the little one had been one of the best decisions of his life. But fate had another twist in store. A storm rolled in one night, sudden and fierce. The wind howled through the cracks of the small beachside home, rattling windows and shaking doors. Rain lashed against the walls, and the fisherman and his wife huddled inside, listening to the fury outside. Then, a sound. A desperate, panicked barking. The dog was at the door, scratching, whining, trying to get their attention. The fisherman rushed to see what had alarmed it, but before he could open the door, the dog bolted through the barely open gap and into the storm. "Wait," he shouted, grabbing his coat and lantern. The dog was already disappearing into the darkness, running toward the shore. Heart pounding, the fisherman followed. The wind nearly pushed him back, but he pressed on, the beam of his lantern slicing through the rain. And then he saw it, a figure struggling in the water. A child. Without a second thought, the fisherman ran forward, plunging into the icy waves. The dog was already there, barking, paddling frantically toward the small figure. The child, barely able to keep their head above water, reached out weakly. The fisherman grabbed hold, pulling the child into his arms, fighting against the current. The dog swam beside them, guiding them back to shore. Finally, gasping for breath, they collapsed onto the wet sand. The child coughed, shivering, but they were alive. The fisherman pulled off his coat, wrapping it around the trembling figure, and looked at the dog, who sat beside them, panting but triumphant. The same puppy he had once saved had now saved another life. As he stared into those familiar, loyal eyes, he realized this was no ordinary dog. This was a miracle. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a calm, glassy ocean and a sky streaked with soft pink and gold. The fisherman, his wife, and the child, now wrapped in warm blankets, sat together by the fire, sipping hot tea. The dog, exhausted but proud, lay curled up at the fisherman's feet, its tail thumping lightly against the wooden floor. The child, a boy no older than 10, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse from the salt water, but his eyes were filled with gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered, looking at the fisherman. Then he turned to the dog. "You both did." The fisherman exchanged a glance with his wife. "What were you doing out there, son?" The boy hesitated, lowering his gaze. I ran away." His fingers clutched the blanket tightly. "I was on a boat with some people, but I got scared. I jumped into the water. I thought I could swim to shore, but the waves," his voice cracked, and he shook his head. The fisherman placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say anything more right now. You're safe." The boy nodded, his eyes welling with tears. He wiped them away quickly, then reached out and gently stroked the dog's head. "What's his name?" The fisherman opened his mouth, then paused. "You know, we never gave him one." The boy smiled, running his fingers through the dog's thick fur. "How about Lucky?" The fisherman chuckled, looking down at the dog, who wagged his tail as if in agreement. "Lucky," he repeated.
"Yeah,
"That sounds just right." But even as they sat in that warm little house, something lingered in the fisherman's mind. Who were the people on that boat? And would they come looking for the boy? He had a feeling the story wasn't over yet. The silence between the fisherman and the man outside stretched long, thick with unspoken words. Ethan's heart raced as he stood there, watching the scene unfold. His hands trembled at his sides, but Lucky's steady presence kept him grounded, the dog's warm body pressed close to his legs. The man outside, his face reddening with frustration, took a step forward. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've been searching for him for months. You have no idea the kind of trouble you're inviting into this place." The fisherman didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto the man, unwavering. "No one's invited trouble here. If you want to take Ethan, you'll have to go through me, and I don't think you're up for that." The man sneered, his expression turning cold. "I'll make sure you regret this." Ethan swallowed hard. The truth of his past, the terror of being dragged back into a life he had fled, clawed at his throat. He wanted to run, to hide, but he stood his ground, his fingers clenched into fists. Lucky growled quietly, sensing Ethan's fear, but his loyalty remained clear. The dog would protect him no matter what. "You'll have to do better than that." The fisherman's voice was firm, unwavering. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking to the house behind him, to the peaceful shore beyond. "You don't understand," he said, his voice a little softer, as if he were searching for some kind of understanding. "I didn't want this for him, but it's for his own good." Ethan shook his head, stepping out from behind the doorframe. His voice cracked as he spoke, but it carried the weight of all the pain he had endured.
no,
"You don't get it.
you left me."
You didn't care about me then, so why now?" The man flinched, as if struck by the truth of the words. For a long moment, the man didn't speak, his eyes darting back and forth, as though searching for the right words that might undo the damage. "I tried to protect you in my own way," the man said quietly. "But I didn't know how to fix things. I thought if I—" "Don't," Ethan cut in, his voice stronger now, finding his confidence. "You don't get to come back and say that. Not after everything." There was a long, heavy pause. The fisherman watched the man, waiting for any sign that he might leave. He stood tall, his hand resting on the doorframe, blocking the way. Finally, the man took a step back, his expression hardening again. "You think you can protect him?" He spat on the ground.
"Fine."
"But know this. I won't give up." The fisherman didn't respond, simply watching the man turn and walk away, his footsteps heavy on the ground. Once the man had disappeared, Ethan's legs buckled beneath him. Lucky rushed to his side, nuzzling his face with a soft whine, and the fisherman was by his side in an instant. "You did well, Ethan," the fisherman said gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "You stood up for yourself.
You don't have to go back to that life."
Ethan nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. He wasn't sure if he felt relief or fear, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a choice. "Thank you," he whispered, looking at the fisherman and his wife. "Thank you for saving me." The fisherman smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You're family now, Ethan. And family sticks together." As they returned inside, Lucky curled up at Ethan's feet once more, his loyal eyes watching over him. The storm had passed, but the future was still uncertain. Yet in that moment, surrounded by the people who cared for him, Ethan realized something deep in his heart. He wasn't alone anymore. The days after the confrontation with Ethan's father were heavy, filled with an air of uncertainty that hung over the small home. The fisherman, his wife, and Ethan went about their lives as usual, but the weight of what had happened lingered. There was no escaping it. The man outside hadn't just threatened them, he had planted seeds of doubt in Ethan's mind. Was his father truly a danger, or had he just been broken by the circumstances, trying to reclaim what he felt was his? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its golden light over the water, Ethan stood by the shore, staring out at the vast expanse of ocean. Lucky was beside him, his coat catching the fading sunlight as he gazed up at his owner, sensing his unease. Ethan hadn't said a word for hours, and the fisherman, noticing his silence, walked over to him, sitting down beside him on the cool sand. "You've been distant lately," the fisherman said gently. "Talk to me, Ethan. Whatever's on your mind." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes still fixed on the waves. "I can't stop thinking about him," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if he's right? What if I don't belong here? What if I'm supposed to go back?" The fisherman was quiet for a moment, letting the question hang in the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and full of the kind of wisdom that only life's hardest lessons could teach. "Ethan, we can't change the past. But the present, right now, is what matters. And in this moment, you are here with us. You have a choice. No one owns you. No one controls you. And you don't have to go back to anything you don't want to." Ethan turned his eyes toward the fisherman, his heart heavy with the decision he felt was looming. "I know, but I'm still afraid. What if he comes back? What if he hurts you or Mom? Or even Lucky?" The dog, sensing Ethan's distress, nudged him gently with his nose, as if to say, "I'll protect you." Ethan smiled weakly at the dog, but the fear still gnawed at him. The fisherman laid a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "We will face it together, whatever happens. But I know one thing. What you're afraid of doesn't define you. You define you." Ethan looked out at the horizon again, his thoughts a storm of confusion. He had never felt more torn, yet in his heart, he knew one thing. This place, with these people, this was where he felt safe. This was where he belonged. Suddenly, from behind them, a soft voice called out, breaking the stillness of the moment. "Hey, Ethan." Ethan turned to see a young girl standing at the top of the hill, her hair blowing in the wind. It was Lily, the fisherman's niece, who had recently come to visit. She waved eagerly, a broad grin on her face. "Come on. We've got something to show you," she called, excitement in her tone. For the first time in days, Ethan felt a spark of curiosity and hope flicker inside him. With Lucky by his side, he stood up and gave a small smile to the fisherman. Maybe I'm ready to see what comes next." The fisherman nodded, his face softening. "That's the spirit. Go on, enjoy the moment, Ethan. We'll take things one step at a time." As Ethan made his way toward Lily, with Lucky bounding happily beside him, the fisherman watched them go, his heart full of hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The waves still crashed on the shore, the sun still set in the distance, but something had changed. The storm inside Ethan was beginning to calm. He had found a new life here, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe in it. As the days passed, the peaceful rhythm of life on the beach slowly began to settle into Ethan's soul. The fisherman, his wife, and the rest of the small community around them became his new family, a safe haven he never thought he would have. But deep inside, a part of him still couldn't fully release the grip of his past. The man who claimed to be his father, the fear of being found again, and the nagging question of where he truly belonged, all of it lingered like shadows in his mind. One evening, weeks after the storm, Ethan sat with Lily by the fire, his hands absent-mindedly tracing patterns in the sand as they chatted. Lucky lay beside him, his head resting on Ethan's foot. The fire crackled, and the distant sound of waves filled the air, as peaceful as ever. But despite the calm exterior, Ethan's heart was restless. "I've been thinking a lot," Ethan admitted, breaking the comfortable silence. Lily looked up at him, her curiosity piqued. "About what?" Ethan hesitated, chewing on his lip. "About him. My father. I'm scared he'll come back. That he'll make me go with him." Lily's expression softened, and she reached out to place a hand on his arm. "I know it's hard, Ethan. But you're not alone anymore. You've got people here who care about you, who want to protect you." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right. He wasn't alone. But that lingering fear, the thought of being torn away from everything he had built here, still haunted him. "I'm just not sure if I'm strong enough to keep running from him," he admitted quietly, his voice trembling. "What if I can't outrun my past forever?" Before Lily could respond, Lucky suddenly stood up, his ears perked, his nose twitching. The dog let out a low growl, his body tense as he stared out toward the darkening horizon. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He recognized that look. Something was coming. Without a word, the two of them stood up, instinctively walking toward the edge of the beach. The firelight flickered behind them, casting long shadows across the sand.
As they
Reached the water's edge, they saw it, something moving in the distance. A boat. Ethan's heart pounded. It wasn't just any boat. It was the same kind as the one his father had used before. The one that had taken him away and cast him into that terrifying world he had fled from. "Ethan," Lily whispered urgently, her hand gripping his arm. "Is that?" Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't need to answer. The silhouette in the boat was unmistakable. It was him. Without thinking, Ethan turned and bolted toward the house, shouting, "We need to warn them." But as he ran, Lucky stayed by his side, his steps steady and protective. Ethan's pulse raced as the boat drew closer, its engine rumbling against the still night air. His father had found him. The nightmare he thought he had outrun was coming back to claim him. When they reached the house, the fisherman was already there, his face grim as he saw the fear in Ethan's eyes. "He's here, isn't he?" the fisherman asked quietly. Ethan nodded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "He found me." The fisherman didn't waste any time. He turned to his wife and gave her a quick, firm instruction. "Get inside. Lock the door." Then, without another word, he stepped out into the night, followed closely by Ethan and Lily. The boat was almost there now, drifting just beyond the shore. It was clear they had come for Ethan. But as the boat neared, something unexpected happened. Instead of slowing down to dock, the boat veered off course, suddenly speeding away into the dark, open water. Ethan froze, watching in disbelief. "What? Why is he leaving?" The fisherman turned to him, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and understanding. "Maybe it's not what you think. Maybe he's given up." Ethan didn't know what to make of it. His father had been relentless, but now he was leaving without a fight? Then, before anyone could say anything more, a new figure appeared on the horizon. It wasn't the man Ethan had feared. It was someone else, someone who, from the looks of it, was just as intent on finding Ethan. But this time there was something different about them. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his past was far from finished with him. The boat that had once seemed like the end of Ethan's troubles now only added to the confusion. The man who had been so sure of taking Ethan back had disappeared, and yet a new figure, a shadow in the distance, now lingered, moving toward the shore. Ethan's pulse quickened again, uncertainty flooding his chest. Was this the end of one nightmare, or the beginning of a new one? The fisherman stood beside him, his expression cautious but determined. "Stay close, Ethan," he said quietly. "We don't know who this is yet." Ethan's mind raced. Was it someone from his past, or someone entirely new? Whoever it was, they had arrived far too soon. He felt as if he was being pulled in different directions, one part of him longing for the safety of his new life, and another part terrified that the past would never let go. Lucky stood alert beside them, his ears perked, eyes never leaving the approaching figure. With each step, the figure grew clearer, a tall man, dressed in weathered clothes, his features obscured by the darkness of the night. But there was something familiar about him, something that made Ethan's heart skip. As the man drew closer, Ethan could make out his face. The man's eyes were dark, calculating, but there was a gentleness there too, a weariness that spoke of years spent searching for something, or perhaps someone. "I'm looking for Ethan," the man called out as he reached them. His voice was steady, not aggressive, but firm. Ethan froze, unsure of whether to step forward or retreat into the safety of the house. The fisherman placed a hand on his shoulder, standing between Ethan and the stranger. "You've found him," the fisherman said. His tone wasn't hostile, but it carried an edge of warning. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, taking a deep breath. I'm not here to take him." He seemed to struggle with the words, as if unsure how to explain himself. "I'm his uncle. I've been looking for him, trying to make sure he's okay." Ethan's stomach lurched. His uncle? He had no idea his father even had family. Was this just another attempt to pull him back into a life he wanted to forget, or was this something different? The fisherman's gaze softened just slightly, though he remained on high alert. "Why didn't you say that before?" "I couldn't," the man said, lowering his eyes. "Your family, Ethan's father, he did things that made me afraid for him. I couldn't take him back into that world, not until I was sure it was safe." Ethan's mind whirled, processing everything. His father had a brother? And this man had been trying to protect him, even if it meant keeping his distance? Before Ethan could respond, the man stepped forward, his voice filled with urgency. "I know this might seem strange, but you have to believe me. I never wanted him to be hurt. I tried to reach out, but there was always something in the way." His voice cracked slightly. "And now I'm afraid it's too late." Ethan's heart beat faster, a sense of dread creeping into his chest. Too late for what? The man hesitated, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. "There are people who still want him, Ethan. People who don't care about his safety. They don't care what your father did or didn't do. They want control. And your father, he's been caught in something far bigger than I ever realized. I tried to warn him, but..." Ethan's stomach twisted. It was all coming at him too quickly. This man wasn't a stranger. He wasn't the threat he'd thought, but that didn't make everything any clearer. "Who are these people?" Ethan asked, barely above a whisper. The man looked toward the water, his face grim. "You're not safe here. Not with them still looking. And they'll come for you, again and again, until they get what they want." Ethan felt his knees weaken as the weight of those words settled in. No one had told him that. No one had ever prepared him for a life where no matter where he went, no matter how far he ran, the past would always chase him. "We've got to go," the man said urgently. "We can't stay here anymore." Lucky growled low, sensing the change in the air, but the fisherman stood his ground, his hand still firmly on Ethan's shoulder. "No," the fisherman said, his voice unyielding. "You don't tell us when to leave. Ethan is safe here. If there's a threat, we'll face it together." The man's eyes hardened. "This isn't a fight you can win. It's bigger than all of us." Ethan felt torn, caught between a sense of loyalty to the people who had saved him and the rising fear that his past, his father's mistakes, would destroy everything he had found. But there was one thing he knew for sure now. He couldn't keep running forever. As the man's words hung in the air, the tension palpable, Ethan made a choice. He wasn't just going to let the past swallow him again. He was going to face it whatever it took. "I'm not running," Ethan said firmly, his voice strong despite the fear in his chest. "I won't let anyone take me back. Not anymore." The fisherman nodded, a slight smile of pride tugging at the corners of his mouth.
"Good.
You've got more strength than you know." But even as the words of reassurance left his lips, they all knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The air was thick with tension, the night alive with the sounds of the waves crashing against the shore and the distant hum of the wind. Ethan stood tall, his hands clenched at his sides, facing the man who claimed to be his uncle. There was no turning back now. His past had caught up with him, and the only choice was to confront it head-on. "I'm not running," Ethan repeated, his voice steady. "I won't let anyone control me anymore." The man, still standing at the edge of the beach, didn't speak for a moment, his gaze unreadable. Ethan could see the conflict in his eyes. Was he there to help or to complicate things even further? For a brief second, it seemed as though the man was about to speak again, but the moment was shattered by a loud, unmistakable sound. The engine of a boat. Everyone froze, their eyes snapping toward the water. A boat was speeding toward the shore, its engine roaring through the night air. This time, there was no mistaking the aggressiveness in its approach. The boat wasn't just drifting, someone was coming for them, and they weren't coming to ask questions. Ethan's heart skipped. This was it. His father? Someone worse? The fear that had been festering in him for so long flared to life, once again. Get inside now, the fisherman ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. Without hesitation, he turned and sprinted toward the house, motioning for Ethan to follow. Ethan didn't wait to question the urgency. He turned, taking off with Lucky at his heels, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. The footsteps behind him were heavy, but there was no time to think about the man who claimed to be his uncle. The only thing that mattered was getting to safety. They burst through the door, the fisherman slamming it shut behind them. Inside, the fisherman's wife was already locking the windows, her face pale but determined. The moment they were inside, Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the strange events of the past few days. The man who claimed to be his uncle was no longer standing at the door. He had followed them inside, his eyes scanning the room warily. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, breathless, as he looked from the man to the fisherman. The man's face tightened, his jaw clenched in frustration. "They're the ones who've been looking for you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The people I've been trying to keep you from." Before Ethan could ask any more questions, the sound of boots on the gravel path outside reached them. Someone was walking toward the house, slowly, methodically, like a predator stalking its prey. "They're here," the man whispered. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out across his back. His father's shadow loomed again, but this time, it wasn't just him. Whoever had been chasing Ethan all along was now closer than ever. The fisherman stepped in front of Ethan and his wife, his voice strong as he spoke to the man. "We won't let them take him. Not while we're standing here." The man nodded, his expression hardening.
Good.
"But we need to prepare. They won't just leave. They'll come in full force." Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. There was nowhere to run this time. The threat was too close. Too real. The fisherman turned to Ethan. "I need you to listen to me, boy. If this is what you want, then we fight. But there's no turning back." Ethan met his gaze, his heart racing. He had always tried to run.
To hide.
To avoid conflict. But for the first time, he realized that running wouldn't help him anymore. These people, these shadows from his past, would keep coming, and it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control of his own story. "I'm ready," Ethan said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'm not afraid anymore." As the sound of footsteps grew louder outside, Ethan knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The door rattled once, then again, as if testing the strength of the walls that now surrounded them. The fisherman raised a hand, signaling for them to stay silent. "Get ready," he murmured, eyes fixed on the door. "We'll face this together." The knock came again, louder this time. The door groaned under the pressure. Ethan's breath caught. The past had finally caught up to him, but this time he wasn't running. The door exploded open, and all hell broke loose. The door splintered under the force, and before anyone could react, figures rushed into the house. Shadows moved quickly, their movements sharp and deliberate. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his every instinct screaming for him to run, to hide, but the fisherman stepped forward, standing tall as a shield between Ethan and the intruders. "Stay back," the fisherman shouted, his voice fierce. "This is our home." The intruders didn't hesitate. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his face, moved toward the fisherman, his eyes cold and calculating. Behind him, two more men followed, their faces masked in shadows, weapons in their hands. Ethan's mind raced. These weren't ordinary men. They were ruthless, determined, and the look in their eyes made it clear that they weren't here for a friendly conversation. Out of the way, the scarred man growled, his voice thick with menace. "We're not here to talk." Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the threat hanging like a storm ready to break. The fisherman didn't flinch. He was a man who had lived through storms before, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for Ethan's future. "You'll have to get through me first," the fisherman said, his stance unwavering. Ethan's heart raced. He couldn't stand there and watch. His past, the things he'd been running from, had finally caught up to him, and there was nowhere to hide. But something inside him clicked, a realization that he wasn't just a victim anymore. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't alone. As the men closed in, Ethan took a step forward, a sense of purpose rising within him. Lucky growled low, sensing the danger, his body tense and ready to protect. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed a heavy metal wrench off the counter and held it out in front of him, his hands shaking but his resolve growing stronger. "I won't let you take me," Ethan said, his voice shaking but firm. The scarred man paused, glancing at Ethan with a look of amusement. "You think that little thing's going to stop us?" He sneered, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He didn't know what Ethan was capable of. The fisherman took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "Ethan's not alone," he said, his voice steady. "And you're not taking him." Ethan felt a surge of courage. He wasn't just a scared kid anymore. He had people who cared for him. He had a family now, and he wouldn't let it be torn apart so easily. The scarred man raised his hand, signaling his men to advance. But just as they moved, the door burst open again, and a voice called out from the doorway, loud and commanding. "Hold it right there." The newcomers were quick, armed, but not like the men inside. They were organized military-like, and they seemed to know exactly who they were after. The scarred man turned, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What do you want?" The new group didn't respond immediately. Instead, a tall woman with striking features stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the scarred man. She was calm, poised, but there was a lethal air about her that made Ethan's blood run cold. "We're here for Ethan," the woman said, her voice steady. "And we don't take kindly to people who think they can claim him as their own." The scarred man's face twisted in frustration. "He's mine. He belongs with my brother." The woman raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Not anymore. He's with us now." Ethan felt the room go silent, the tension thick in the air. Two sides, both claiming him, both insisting that he belonged with them. It was like watching a war unfold in slow motion, and Ethan was caught in the middle. The fisherman stepped forward again, his eyes hard. "You won't take him. Not without a fight." Ethan could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His past, his future, everything was hanging in the balance.
Who were these people?
Why did they want him? And more importantly, who could he trust? Before he could make sense of it all, Lucky, who had been quietly standing beside him, let out a sharp bark, breaking the silence. His instincts were spot on. Something was off about all of this. Ethan turned to the woman, his voice filled with a mix of fear and defiance. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze softened slightly. "I'm someone who's here to protect you," she said, her tone not cold but firm. "And the people who are after you, they've done enough damage." The room was still, everyone watching each other closely. The scarred man sneered, but his grip on his weapon tightened, his expression a mixture of anger and frustration. "You think you can keep him from me? You're all fools." Ethan didn't know who was telling the truth, but for the first time in his life, he didn't feel completely alone. His choice was coming, and it was a big one. He had to decide who he could trust, who he wanted to trust. "Ethan," the fisherman said softly, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. "Whatever you choose, we'll stand by you. Your family." Ethan turned toward the fisherman, then to the woman, and finally to the scarred man. His heart raced as he realized the truth. His life was his own now. No one was going to decide his fate for him. Not his father, not his so-called uncle, and not these strangers who had appeared in the middle of the night. He was ready to take control. "Enough!" Ethan shouted, his voice strong and clear. "I'm not your pawn. I'm not anyone's property." And with that declaration, everything changed. The room fell into an eerie silence after Ethan's declaration. The tension was palpable, thick like smoke, and everyone seemed to hold their breath. The scarred man's sneer twisted into something darker, while the woman's eyes narrowed, assessing Ethan with an intensity that made his heart race. "You think you can stand up to us?" The scarred man spat, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his weapon. "You're just a kid." Ethan's grip tightened around the wrench, the cold metal steady in his hands. His fear hadn't gone away. It was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but something else had replaced it. A fierce determination. The fisherman stepped forward, positioning himself between Ethan and the approaching threat. "He's not just a kid," he said, his voice unshaken. "He's one of us." The scarred man scoffed, but his eyes flickered, the uncertainty in them momentarily betraying his tough exterior. He wasn't used to opposition. Not like this. The woman, standing just behind the scarred man, kept her calm demeanor but spoke with authority. "We didn't come here to fight. We came here to protect him. There are forces far worse than these men who will stop at nothing to get him back." Ethan's mind raced. Forces? What did that even mean? He had no idea who these people were, but one thing was clear. They weren't here by accident. And neither were the men who had broken down the door. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Why me?" he asked, his voice shaky but demanding an answer. "What's so special about me?" The woman's gaze softened, and for a moment, Ethan saw something almost kind in her eyes. "You're not just anyone, Ethan," she said quietly. "You have something they want. Something they'll stop at nothing to control." The scarred man grunted in frustration. "Enough of this nonsense. He's coming with us." He took a step forward, his hand raised in a threatening gesture. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, and before he could react, Lucky growled low, his body tensing in front of him, instinctively stepping into a protective stance. The dog's growl was enough to stop everyone in their tracks. The woman's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Ethan. "We're not your enemies," she said again, her voice firm but calm. "But if you don't come with us, the people who've been hunting you, they'll destroy everything. They'll come for everyone you love." Ethan felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had been running for so long, trying to escape his past, trying to leave it all behind. But now it was catching up to him faster than he could ever have imagined. And these people, these strangers, were they truly his chance to fight back? Suddenly, the door to the house creaked, and the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them. The fisherman's wife stepped into the room, her face pale but determined. "They're not the only ones coming." Ethan's heart raced again. More people? More enemies? "No more running, Ethan," the fisherman said, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to make a choice. We face them head-on, or we give in and let them take everything. But you don't have to do this alone. We'll protect you." Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, but something deep inside him stirred. These were his people. They had taken him in when he had nothing left, when he was broken and lost. They had fought for him when no one else had. He couldn't let them fall because of him. With a deep breath, he took a step forward, his decision solidifying in his chest. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ethan said, turning his eyes to the scarred man. "And I'm not going to let you hurt anyone here." The woman's eyes flickered with something akin to respect, but the scarred man's face twisted into a snarl. "So be it," he hissed, his hand raising to give the signal. Before anyone could react, the woman made a sharp motion with her hand. Instantly, the men behind her shifted into action, moving to intercept the intruders with swift, precise movements. It was like watching a well-practiced team of warriors move as one, each of them efficient and deadly. The fisherman didn't hesitate either. He grabbed Ethan by the shoulder, pulling him back toward the safety of the house's deeper rooms. "Stay close," he commanded. But Ethan hesitated, looking back toward the chaos unfolding in the room. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about running or hiding. It was about fighting for his future. He glanced at Lily, the fisherman's wife, who had her eyes locked on him with a mixture of fear and trust. And then, just as the scarred man lunged toward the woman, Ethan made up his mind. "I won't hide anymore," he said, his voice steady. Without another word, he ran toward the conflict, wrench in hand, ready to face whatever was coming. His heart was racing, but this time, it wasn't with fear. It was with the rush of finally taking control of his own destiny. As the first clash of weapons echoed in the air, Ethan knew there was no going back. But for the first time in his life, the chase was on again, but this time, there was no slowing down. As they ran, Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. His choices, his actions had put everyone in danger. But there was no going back. They needed to reach the safe house. And they needed to get there fast. With each step, Ethan could hear the footsteps of the scarred man and his allies getting closer. But he couldn't let that stop him. He had to keep moving. He had to stay ahead. Suddenly, the woods opened up to a clearing. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he saw a small cabin in the distance, barely visible through the trees. This was it, the place the woman had mentioned, the safe house. "We're almost there," the woman shouted, urging them forward. But just as hope flickered in Ethan's chest, a loud shout pierced the air. "They're here," someone yelled from behind. The scarred man and his group had caught up. Ethan's pulse quickened. There was no more running. They had to fight, and they had to fight now. He turned to the woman, who was already preparing herself for what was coming. "You'll be safe here," she said. "But you need to be ready. They won't back down easily." Ethan swallowed hard, his nerves threatening to overwhelm him. But he couldn't let fear win. He had already come too far. The future was in his hands now. And he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. As the first of the attackers came into view, Ethan gripped the wrench tighter, ready for whatever came next. The clearing was bathed in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves and the pounding of Ethan's heart. He stood there, at the edge of the safe house, gripping the wrench in his hand as the attackers drew closer. His breath was shallow, but there was no turning back now. The scarred man and his team were almost upon them, their shadows creeping through the trees, their eyes locked onto the group. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that everything he had fought for, everything he had run from, was culminating here. "Now. Get ready," the woman whispered, her voice sharp with authority. She had her hand on a small knife at her belt, her stance ready. The fisherman and his wife positioned themselves between Ethan and the attackers, their eyes steely with determination. Lucky, his loyal dog, stood at the front, growling low, muscles taut, sensing the oncoming danger. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had never been a fighter. He had always been the one to hide, to avoid the conflict. But now, something inside him had shifted. The fear that had gripped him for so long had been replaced by a different feeling, one that felt like fire. He wasn't going to run anymore. Not now. The scarred man stepped into the clearing, his eyes sweeping over the group. A smug grin spread across his face as he sized them up, clearly confident they had nowhere to go. "I told you," he sneered. "You should have come quietly. Now you'll pay the price." Ethan stood taller, the wrench in his hand feeling heavier, but somehow grounding him. "I'm not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. He felt the weight of the words, the promise of defiance in them. The scarred man's grin faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing in anger. "You're making a mistake, kid. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "You have no idea who we are," the woman countered, stepping forward with a cold, calculating look. "And you're about to find out." In an instant, the battle began. The scarred man lunged forward, his weapon raised, aiming for the woman. But before he could strike, the fisherman intercepted him, blocking the blow with a swift movement. The two men grappled, their struggle fierce but controlled. Ethan's eyes darted to the others. The wife had already engaged another attacker, her movements swift and precise, while Lucky lunged at yet another, knocking him to the ground with a powerful bite. Ethan didn't wait for instructions. He couldn't. Adrenaline surged through him, and his instincts kicked in. The man closest to him was moving too quickly. Ethan swung the wrench with all his strength, connecting with the man's arm, knocking him back. The man cursed, stumbling, but didn't fall. Instead, he lunged again, but this time, Ethan was ready. He blocked the next strike, using the wrench to parry, the metal making a sharp sound as it deflected the blow. He felt the weight of the wrench in his hands, but it was no longer heavy. It was a tool, a weapon he could control. His attacker swung again, but Ethan was faster this time, stepping aside and using the wrench to knock the man off balance. He didn't know what he was doing, but in that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was survival. The woman's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the noise. "Ethan, get to the cabin." But before he could move, the scarred man, having gained the upper hand on the fisherman, turned toward Ethan, a feral look in his eyes. "You're mine," he growled, charging forward with a fury. Ethan's pulse raced, his entire body screaming to run, to get away. But he didn't. He stood his ground. Just as the scarred man lunged at him, Ethan's instincts kicked in. With a quick, desperate movement, he swung the wrench in a wide arc, striking the man square in the chest. The force of the blow sent the scarred man stumbling backward, crashing to the ground with a grunt of pain. For a moment, everything was still. Then the scarred man's eyes locked onto Ethan's, filled with rage and disbelief. He scrambled to his feet, his hand reaching for his weapon. But it was too late. The woman had already moved in, her knife flashing in the moonlight as she disarmed him with a swift, fluid motion. The scarred man fell to his knees, his hands raised in surrender. But the look in his eyes told Ethan everything. He wasn't beaten.
Not yet.
But for now, the immediate threat had passed. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, his mind still spinning. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to focus. They weren't done yet. More would come. The scarred man's group was just the beginning. "Let's get inside," the woman said, her voice low but firm. "We don't have much time." Without a word, they turned and headed toward the cabin. But as they reached the door, Ethan couldn't help but glance over his shoulder at the scarred man, still kneeling on the ground, defeated for now. "We'll be back for you," the scarred man hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Ethan didn't reply. He didn't have to. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. As the door slammed shut behind them, Ethan realized that the fight had only just begun. The door of the cabin creaked shut behind them with a heavy finality, sealing off the chaos of the woods and the relentless pursuit that would inevitably follow. Inside, the air was thick with tension, each of them still breathing heavily from the fight. Ethan leaned against the wall, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline, the wrench gripped tightly in his fingers. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The woman's eyes scanned the room, calculating. "We've bought ourselves some time, but not much. They'll regroup quickly. We need to move.
Now."
The fisherman and his wife stood near the fireplace, already preparing for what might come next. They had seen things, Ethan could tell, things that made them unshakable in the face of danger. Their calm, focused demeanor reassured him, but it also made the situation feel even more real. This wasn't just some random attack. This was bigger than that. "Who were they?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with the weight of his fear. "What do they want from me?" The woman, who had yet to reveal her name, paused for a moment, her eyes flickering with a mix of pity and something darker. "It's not just about you, Ethan. They want everything you're tied to. Your past, your bloodline, whatever power they think you hold. They're hunting you because they believe you're the key to something much bigger than you can imagine." Ethan's mind spun as the woman's words settled over him. Power? Bloodline? He wasn't some ancient heir to a throne or anything like that. He was just a kid who had spent most of his life running from one place to the next, trying to escape his past. The idea that anyone would think he held any kind of significance, that they would come after him with such force, felt absurd. And yet, the fisherman looked up from where he was organizing some supplies. "The people chasing you, they've been hunting anyone connected to your family for years. Your father, he was part of something dangerous. And when he disappeared, they didn't just stop looking. They've been tracking anyone with his bloodline, hoping to find the key to something powerful. Ethan's stomach churned. His father? The man who had abandoned him? The man he barely remembered? What had he been a part of? Why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? Ethan's voice cracked as he spoke, the frustration and confusion bubbling up inside him. We didn't know how, the woman said, her voice steady but tinged with regret. You weren't ready to hear it. But now you don't have a choice. Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling. He had been running his whole life, escaping from places and people, always trying to hide from his past. But now, it seemed his past was catching up to him, and there was no way out. Not anymore. We can't stay here, the fisherman said, his voice low but firm. We need to get you somewhere safer, somewhere they won't find us so easily. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, to ask what exactly he was supposed to do in all of this, but he was interrupted by a sudden noise, footsteps crunching in the snow outside, the sound of voices carrying through the cold night air. They're already here, the woman said, her voice calm but urgent. We don't have time. Get to the back door. Now. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he followed the group to the back of the cabin, his feet stumbling slightly in the snow as they moved quickly but quietly. The sound of the intruders grew louder, closer. Ethan could see the glow of their flashlights through the cracks in the cabin's walls. The woman turned to him, her eyes locking onto his. You have to listen to me, Ethan. This is it. No more running. You need to make a choice. Stand and fight, or run again. But this time, you'll be running forever. Ethan's heart clenched. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for any of it. But the choice was clear. He had nowhere to go, no place to hide anymore. Fight, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I'm not running anymore. The woman gave him a small, approving nod. Good. Stay close to me, and don't hesitate. With that, they all made their way through the woods, the cold night air biting at their skin, the distant sound of their pursuers still growing louder. And then, just as they reached the edge of the trees, the crack of a gunshot rang through the night, shattering the stillness like glass. Ethan's heart dropped. They had found them. The chase was on once more. The gunshot echoed through the still night, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Ethan's blood ran cold. They had no more time to waste. The sound of the shot reverberated, sharp and unforgiving, sending a chill through him that wasn't just from the cold air. It was the realization that they had found them. Move, the woman hissed, grabbing Ethan by the arm and yanking him into motion. His heart pounded, his legs pumping in the snow as they dashed deeper into the forest, the trees offering them a little cover, but not much. The crack of more gunshots followed, each one closer than the last. Ethan could feel the weight of each step, the heavy breaths of the group, but he pushed it all down, forcing himself to focus. Stay close, the woman shouted, her voice carrying an edge of urgency. Ethan could barely keep up as they wove through the trees, the snow crunching underfoot, but the air was thick with tension. He could hear the sounds of their pursuers gaining on them. His mind raced. Why didn't I run earlier? Why did I think I could just hide forever? Another gunshot rang out and the woman flinched, but she didn't stop, didn't falter. Ethan could see it in her eyes. She was a fighter, not a runner.
And now so was he.
He glanced over his shoulder. Two men were visible now, their figures just behind the tree line, moving quickly but cautiously. The scarred man wasn't with them, but they didn't need him. These men had been trained for this, and they weren't stopping until they got what they came for. The fisherman and his wife were ahead of them now, and Lucky, always alert, was darting ahead, circling back to make sure they weren't being followed too closely. They were moving as one, a well-oiled team, but even they couldn't outrun the inevitable forever up ahead, the woman suddenly said, pointing toward a small clearing in the distance. There's a cabin. We can't outrun them forever, but we can hold them off there. Ethan nodded, his body moving on instinct as they all sprinted toward the cabin. His mind was spinning. Hold them off. He wasn't sure what he could do, but it didn't matter. There was no choice now. As they reached the cabin, The woman motioned for them to stop. They all crouched low, gathering themselves for what was coming. The sound of footsteps grew closer. He could feel his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. His eyes met the woman's. She nodded, signaling him to get ready. "They're getting close," the fisherman said, his voice strained but steady. "When they show themselves, we fight." Ethan tightened his grip on the wrench, feeling the cold metal bite into his palms. The others seemed prepared, but he wasn't sure if he was. He didn't know what he was doing, he didn't know how to fight. How could he stand against these men? "Don't think," the woman said, her voice low, her eyes locking onto his. "Just act. Trust your instincts. That's all you need right now." Before Ethan could respond, the first man emerged from the tree line, his figure dark against the pale snow. He was moving carefully, scanning the area. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, and he tightened his grip on the wrench, but he didn't move. The woman was right. Now wasn't the time for thinking. They waited, every second stretching out longer than the last. The man took another step forward, his eyes sweeping the clearing, but he didn't see them. The woman made a quick, decisive motion with her hand.
"Now."
Everything happened at once. The fisherman moved first, launching himself at the man with surprising speed and strength, forcing him backward. Ethan followed without thinking, his body reacting before his brain could even process what was happening. He swung the wrench at the second man, who had appeared out of the trees, catching him off guard. The impact was solid, and the man staggered back, but he didn't fall. He retaliated quickly, grabbing Ethan's wrist and trying to twist it, but Ethan gritted his teeth and fought back with everything he had. He pulled his arm free and swung again, this time connecting with the man's jaw. The sound of it made his stomach turn, but he didn't stop. The fight was chaotic, 2-on-2. The woman was already moving to engage the first man, her knife flashing in the moonlight as she expertly dodged his strikes. The fisherman and his wife had split up, each of them fighting one of the attackers, using their surroundings to their advantage. Ethan's heart raced, but he didn't give in to the fear. He couldn't. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for control. For freedom. Suddenly, a sharp cry cut through the chaos. Ethan turned to see the fisherman's wife stumble, a knife sticking out of her side. "No!" the fisherman shouted, his face contorted with rage and panic. He surged forward, but the man he had been fighting blocked his path. Ethan's chest tightened. They couldn't lose anyone else. He couldn't lose them. Not after everything they had done for him. He ran toward the woman's side, desperation driving him forward. Without thinking, he swung his wrench with every ounce of strength he could muster. The man in front of the fisherman's wife fell, and Ethan didn't wait for him to get back up. He grabbed the woman and pulled her back behind the cabin's walls, breathing heavily, his heart hammering. "We're not done yet," the woman gasped, wiping blood from her mouth. "Keep fighting." Ethan looked around. The scarred man had to be close. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They still had a chance. The tension in the air was thick, the sound of ragged breathing and the faint thudding of footsteps echoing from the distance. The battle had left everyone battered, but none more so than the fisherman's wife, who was now bleeding and struggling to stay conscious. Ethan's chest was tight as he crouched by her side, doing his best to staunch the bleeding with what little he had. But in his gut, he felt the urgency of the moment. More attackers would be coming soon. They had no time to waste. The woman, still standing, grimaced as she wiped the blood off her knife. "We can't stay here. We need to finish this." Ethan nodded, his heart sinking as he looked at the group. The fisherman had his hand on his wife's shoulder, his face lined with fear and frustration, but his resolve was unshaken. "We can fight," the woman said, her voice low but steady. "We have to." Ethan hesitated, looking over the clearing one last time. His entire life had been about running, about hiding. But now, standing on the precipice of it all, he realized that running wasn't an option anymore. The man who had caused so much pain was out there, and the others who were hunting him wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. He didn't have the luxury of being afraid. The scarred man's voice came suddenly, carried by the wind, raspy, filled with anger. "This ends now, Ethan." Ethan's heart clenched. He turned to the others. "We don't have much time." The woman nodded. "We fight. We finish this here, and now." A brutal stillness fell over the cabin as they heard the faintest crunch of footsteps. The scarred man and his remaining men were closing in. They had no choice. This was it. Ethan, the fisherman, and the woman took their positions as the cabin door opened just enough to reveal the figures in the distance. The scarred man stepped into view, his grin stretched wide with malicious anticipation. "You can't hide forever, Ethan," he spat. "You'll never be free." But Ethan was done running. He raised his wrench, his hands steady now, heart beating with an unshakable determination. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about taking control. The woman was the first to strike, darting forward with the precision of someone who had fought countless battles before. She moved with a deadly grace, her knife slashing through the air, forcing the first attacker to retreat. The fisherman, his face contorted with pain but fueled by a deep, undying drive to protect, rushed the second man with a force that only years of survival could build. The two men collided, their struggle a dance of strength and desperation, but it was the fisherman's resolve that ultimately pushed his opponent back. Then it was Ethan's turn. The scarred man turned, his eyes burning with fury. He had underestimated Ethan, underestimated the fire that had sparked in him after everything he had been through. "You should have stayed out of this," the scarred man growled. Ethan didn't respond.
He didn't need to.
With a roar of determination, he swung the wrench, catching the scarred man off guard. The blow landed with a sickening thud against the man's ribs, sending him sprawling to the ground. The scarred man recovered quickly, scrambling to his feet, but Ethan was faster. He pressed the attack, using his instincts, fueled by anger and fear, to force the man back with every swing. The fight raged on, but Ethan could feel the shift. The scarred man was slowing, his movements more desperate. And in that moment, with everything on the line, Ethan landed the final blow, a hard strike to the head that sent the man crumpling to the ground, unconscious. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a hoarse voice from behind him. "Not bad, kid." Ethan turned to see the woman and the fisherman standing by, both bloodied but alive. The wife was still clinging to consciousness, her hand pressed against her side, but she had made it. They had all made it through. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. The survivors from the group, realizing that the battle was lost, began to retreat, their faces twisted with hatred but unwilling to push their luck further. Ethan exhaled shakily, his hands still clenched around the wrench. He wasn't sure how it had all happened, how he had gone from the scared kid running from his past to someone who had stood their ground, who had fought. But here they were. They had won. The woman stepped toward him, her face softening just slightly. "You did good, Ethan. You've earned your place in this fight." The fisherman nodded, his voice gruff but approving. "You're one of us now." Ethan didn't know what to say, his mind still trying to process everything. But he felt it, the shift. The past didn't define him anymore. He wasn't just running. He wasn't just surviving. He was part of something bigger now. And whatever came next, he would face it head-on. "We should get moving," the woman said, her voice steady again. "This won't be the last time they come for you." Ethan looked around at the group. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Still, for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. They had each other. And that was enough. The end.